Okay, we are live. So everybody don't do anything embarrassing. No, I'm just kidding. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chris's Corner. My name is Chris Trondsen, the host of Chris's Corner. I am an individual who lives with mental health. I have obsessive compulsive disorder, also body dysmorphic disorder, and the anxiety, depression, and panic that comes with that. I've come full circle, and now I'm a therapist specializing in the treatment of those disorders in California. And I'm also one of the International OCD Foundation's lead advocates. And one of my responsibilities and one of the things that I'm passionate about is this live stream, which offers education, community, and resources to individuals with OCD and other mental health related disorders throughout the globe. We're international folks. So as you get in, Jess is going to put in the chat to really encourage everybody to announce where they're from, to ask any questions. So we definitely want an active audience today. So any questions that you have, please place in the chat, announce yourself in the chat. We definitely want to include you throughout this live stream. So today's topic is about men's mental health, and we're going to spend some time on that. It is Men's Mental Health Month. The month of November focuses on some of the unique challenges men face when it comes to mental health and mental health treatment and stigma. We also want to make sure that we're inclusive and include anybody. So if you don't relate to the topic, maybe you're dealing with OCD and you're not a male, or you don't have a family or a loved one suffering or struggling who's a male, definitely ask your general questions too. This is your stream. We want to make sure to answer all of your different questions and make sure that we are including you and what you want to talk about. So don't be shy. Make sure to say hi in the chat and announce yourself. So excited about today's episode. I have two great guests that I'm going to announce in a second. But as always, I just want to have a quick disclaimer. Always remember that this live stream is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you are in a crisis or you feel you are ever suicidal or unsafe, please go to the local emergency room, call 911, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. Also, we want to create a safe space as possible, so be kind and respect everyone. With that, this is being broadcast on various social media platforms and is being recorded. So please be mindful of that as you ask personal questions or leave comments. At the end of the day, we are all here to support each other. So definitely, like I said, make sure you get your questions and your comments in the chat. We want to include you in this conversation. So I am not alone today. I have two guests that I'm really, really excited about. So I'm going to announce them now. So my first guest is Alex. I'm going to have him say his last name because I'm not Italian. So I'm going to say it as IOCDF, and that's going to be a very non-Italian way to say it. So I'll have him say it. But he is a licensed marriage and family therapist and associate professional clinical counselor who specializes in working with men. He received his master's degree in counseling from California State University, Fullerton, Master of Science like me. We were cohorts. He's currently working in private practice and previously has worked in community agency settings and school-based settings for the last 3 years. He has conducted research in the area of counseling men, masculinity, and restrictive emotionality. He is also a member of the APA's Division 51, which is dedicated to further research and public knowledge of masculinity and its impact on men's mental health. He has given talks at elementary schools on how to implement programs to help boys grow up with a more positive view of masculinity. His private practice primarily involves seeing men who are entering treatment for the first time. And he went to school with me, one of my favorite fellow students, and I'm happy to have you on. Say your last name for everybody, because I've probably butchered it for like 5-6 years I've known you.
It's Iacovidi. Yeah.
Okay, see, that's why I didn't try to say it. All right, so our next guest, Neil, is a man, a mentally ill man, and he cares about people. That was literally his bio. But I'm going to give him a little bit more hype than that. So Neil is actually a good friend of mine. Neil has obsessive compulsive disorder, and I actually met him at the conferences. And in fact, I don't know if you remember this, but you came up to me and talked about just the need for like a men's support group, because there's certain intrusive thoughts that men with OCD have, sometimes intrusive thoughts against women, and just not feeling comfortable maybe to open up about that around other genders or individuals that are non-conforming. So, you know, this was kind of like one of your babies back then, bringing this up. But I've known you for a long time. You've come to the conferences, you've spoken, different capacities, talked about substance abuse, men's mental health, and really helped out with the young adult track and information. So Neil, therapist and an individual with OCD. I'm happy to have you on here.
Thanks, Chris.
Absolutely. All right. So Dave is with us. He says hi to everybody. So hi, Dave. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure, like I said, everybody get your questions in the chat, announce where you're at. But I'm really happy to have both of you gentlemen on. I mean, one of the things that when I was doing research for men's mental health, I found staggering statistics I didn't even specifically know. And I think that, some of when I sent out that this was going to be the topic, I even had a lot of women, a lot of mothers that are saying, look, my daughter's dealing with, eating disorder or OCD or mental health, and she's very open and speaks about it and willing to get help, but my son won't. Or, I had a individual reach out and say, my mom and dad have OCD, and my mom is willing to get help, but my dad's not. So that's why I want to kind of start with that. And Megan says this is an important topic and very needed. Thank you, Megan. I'm going to start with you, Alex. Tell me a little bit about men's mental health. Like, why do you think it's important to sort of focus a spotlight on mental health issues and the unique challenges men experience? Obviously they don't only experience it in the month of November, but really having a month dedicated to that.
Right. Well, I think, it's a great question. Masculinity has really taken on a really, unfortunately, sort of negative, a lot of negative values have been associated with it. Particularly one is that men are essentially taught that their feelings aren't okay, right? That we have to take on this sort of stoic, I can handle anything. The sturdy oak, right, is sort of like the metaphor of what we're supposed to be. And with that, I think there is this really ignoring our feelings and the shame associated with our sort of internal experience, right? Because we're feeling these feelings, but then we're told that having those feelings are wrong, right? It's part of the human experience to have feelings such as fear, sadness, hurt, those are normal feelings. But for men, those are feelings that carry with it a lot of shame, right? Because they go against what we're taught to be. And so with that, again, men are taught that I need to shove my emotions down or feel a deep sense of shame associated with my emotions. So really, I think taking time to really dedicate and say like, hey, it's okay that you have those feelings. Those feelings are normal, bring them out. And we need to really, really get down to those and focus on those, I think is huge. And it's so important for men to have that. And so I think taking that space to be able to say like, hey, man, you need this too, right? This is huge. I think it's critical. But yeah, I think, I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, and it makes me think of in grad school, I remember Dr. Leah Brew was talking about like one of the things that they, obviously they can only say that there's a correlation, not a causation, but they were saying one of the correlations they believe that men don't live as long as women is because from years and decades of holding an emotion, holding back feelings, holding all of that, not being able to express ourselves, like that does damage on our immune system, that does damage to our psyche. And so we're seeing higher levels of suicide in older men and health issues and stuff. So I think that's so important. Thanks for touching on that. Neil, for you, maybe same kind of thing, but from a lived experience, like someone who has sought out treatment, why, like I was saying in your intro, I know that you came to me and just talked about like some of the reasons that you felt like having a specific talk, and now you've had a successful support group at the conferences each year around men's mental health. What was it for you that you felt like, hey, like a month like this is important, or specific groups or information for this is important?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think it stems from so many of my friends, even watching me go through the journey of getting into therapy at 13 and, being so open about my feelings. It's just alien, right? It just still seems extremely alien for most men to express their feelings appropriately, in healthy, right, productive ways. And I think it's just a shame. I think for me, it's almost baffling that we are still talking about this, because it seems like we've come so far, but really the men's mental health movement has only been up and running for the past 20, 30 years or something, if that. So we're still in the infancy of understanding where these cultural norms came from, how we're going to disintegrate them, right? How we're going to deconstruct them and build them back up. But no, it's important for me because I feel like a lot of my childhood, I was bullied for being too sensitive or being really emotional, or I was seen as extremely feminine because, I only had friends who were girls, all those kind of things. So no, I think men's mental health is excruciatingly important because I've lost people to suicide. I I still see some of my friends to this day holding in their emotions or expressing them in inappropriate ways, right? Where it's like that can be fixed, right? That, you know, expressing emotions in inappropriate ways can cause horrible harm to your life, your social status, your money, whatever it is, right? And there's a fix. Go to therapy. Go to therapy, talk to your friends, get a community around you, all those kind of things, and learn better coping skills. So no, it's crucial.
Absolutely. Thank you, Neil. I just want to say quickly hi to Dottie, Nikki. They just jumped on. Megan has a question at 12:09 your time. Jess, this is, do you think men with high functioning autism can benefit from this discussion? Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things we want to talk about. I'm doing another men's mental health talk that's going to be kind of like solely OCD, but I would love to address like other mental health. And we know that the rates in autism are much higher for men than women. I mean, it's exponentially higher for men. And I would say autism, especially, like that's something, we used to call it high functioning autism, Asperger's, and there was men that were, living with Asperger's and never getting treated. And so, only until like, I think the law passed in 2012 where, insurance companies had to cover mental health and any kind of treatment and resources for individuals with autism. So I absolutely think that men with autism could benefit with this as well. I mean, like I said, there's such a high number and the numbers seem to be growing. And so I think it's super, super important. Let's say somebody is treatment resistant as a male. So let's maybe go to like friends and family. Let's say it's a wife or a girlfriend or a son or a dad. Like, what is the best way, Alex, that you've seen that a support system can have that conversation with a male loved one who's sort of like, resistant maybe, or at least ambivalent to receiving any kind of mental health treatment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the biggest thing is to make sure that you're empowering them, right? To let them know, hey, this is your decision, right? And this is the next step in your progress. Men, again, we've been socialized to feel like we need to handle our issues. We need to be able to have all the solutions to all of our problems. And so if you kind of put therapy in a perspective of, hey, this is you handling your issue. You're still doing the work in therapy. It's still you doing it. It's just you're having somebody else to kind of bounce those thoughts off, bounce those feelings off of. And just really, again, it's just about that empowerment piece, because you're still saying like, hey, you're still doing the work. You're still the one that's making the change. You're still the one that's handling your issues. This is just how you do it, right? This is the next step in what you need to do now. You've done a great job of handling your issues, and now maybe you need to do this, right? So just that empowerment piece really, really helps with the reduction of shame, because I think that's the biggest block, is men feeling like they're either a disappointment to their family, or by admitting, hey, I need help, is saying like, hey, I'm not good enough to handle things for myself and my family. And so again, by empowering them and saying like, hey, this is you taking that step to make that difference. Again, I think that's the key part to really address that shame piece.
Thanks, Alex. And Neil, to piggyback off of Alex's answer, how do you think therapy can be explained to someone that it's not that, hey, you're weak and you can't handle this yourself and you're not trying hard enough or you're not mentally strong enough, into, hey, just like you're not going to do your own heart surgery, or just like you're not going to take care of your own cancer, like this is a issue of health as well. It just happens to be the brain, which is also part of the body. Here's why it would be useful or helpful for you to get some care. How was it explained to you, or how have you seen it be effective to maybe friends, in a way that people can see it as something that's supportive versus you're weak, go here to be fixed?
I mean, I think the most important thing I could say is I think it's the strongest move, right? I mean, I think it's the strongest move you can make if you're feeling weak about getting treatment. So, Alex, what you were talking about totally reminded me of I had to go into rehab. I had to go into specialized rehab for my drinking issues and my OCD last March. No, not last March, March 2020. And I remember the whole time. I mean, the one thing that kept me from going way earlier was I can handle my drinking. I can handle it. I can do this. I can handle this OCD. I've done it for 10 years prior, right? Like there's no way that I need inpatient treatment. And I think being there, it was so difficult, right? It was so difficult doing the emotionality work. It was so difficult doing the sobriety work around those issues, tackling them both at once. I mean, I think the one thing that I say to people is people have this misconception that therapy is just, I go into Alex's office and I say, I'm sad. And Alex gives me a big hug and goes, you're okay, boo boo. And then sends me on my way. Right. No, therapy is like rigorous emotional breaking down of everything inside of you. Right. All of these paradigms, all these cognitive distortions, it's school, it's work. Right. And it's hard work. So I think that when I encourage friends to go into therapy and then all of a sudden they realize, oh, this is like really difficult. Yeah. And you're doing the dang thing, right? You're doing the dang thing yourself. You're conquering all those demons on your own, right? That therapist is just there to guide you. So, I mean, that's one thing that I say. And then another thing is I give them the alternative, right? I mean, I use myself as an example all the time that like, I didn't take care of myself. I knew I should have. I almost ruined my life. And if you'd like to go down that road, that's totally fine. I'll stick by you and still be your pal, right? But you're going to develop unhealthy coping mechanisms. You're going to make people around you unhappy by never talking about anything, right? And lastly, I tell people it's a step at a time. Like, people get overwhelmed by therapy because they think, another misconception is you're going to go into this office and Alex is going to perform brain surgery on you and he's going to pick out all the nasty things and like present them to you on a platter. It's a pebble at a time, right? And if pebbles are too much for you to handle, start with dust, pebbles, move the rocks, then move the mountain.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, Alex, I know, with depression rates are really high in men. They're high in everybody, but, obviously they're high in men, but there's higher rates of suicide in males. Also, depression a lot of times comes out more in forms of like anger and aggression and less of sadness. And so often men are not diagnosed for depression. They're depressed, diagnosed with maybe anger issues because there's a lot more aggression that comes out maybe than traditionally when people think of depression, they think of like sadness and things like that. Why in your work do you believe that there are higher suicide rates in men, especially older males? And why depression comes out in more aggression and anger? Why do you feel like anger is more safe to express than like sadness or vulnerability for men?
Right. That's a great question. Well, there's a lot of different theories as to why the depression or the suicide rate's higher for men. Some research suggests that it's just because they use more lethal means, right? They use guns, they make sure that they die. But the other thought is that really they don't have an outlet, right? And so they really wait until they're at the brink. And it's almost more terrifying to be vulnerable and turn to somebody and say, hey, I need your help. This is where I'm at right now. That's more terrifying than dying, right? They don't want to live with that sense of shame. And it's just it just, again, goes to show how deep of a level of shame there is there. And again, really also men. So to go to your next question, the piece on anger, again, anger is a lot less vulnerable to express. And that's the one that has been sort of generally accepted. And a lot of times with anger, there's feelings that are underneath it, such as helplessness, fear, hurt. Those ones never get acknowledged. And those are the ones that need to get acknowledged to handle things like depression. And so a lot of times what happens is, to go back to like, men tend to ignore their internal experiences because there's a great deal of shame, right? Because they're feeling those feelings of hurt, fear, and helplessness. But again, they ignore that because that's not okay. And so they start to externalize their issues. So they start to say, well, my life would be perfect if they acted a certain way, or if my job was better, or if I had that car, then my life would be perfect. So because again, they can't look inward and say like, I feel hurt. Why do I feel hurt? And that's really what would address the depression. And again, allow them to turn to other people for support, but they never get to have that experience because instead it turns into anger, where they kind of apply anger to different things. Like, I'm angry because I don't have control over that. I'm angry because, that person's bothering me. And then so again, they never really get to the underlying issue, but it's a lot more safe to do that because, to do the other and say like, hey, there's something I need to work on. This is a difficult feeling for me. That's when it gets into that shameful piece, that vulnerable piece, that maybe I, can't handle my emotions, or, what does this mean? And, another quick point is, a lot of times men will compare their internal worlds to other men's external worlds. And so they see themselves as having these different experiences internally of like, hey, I sometimes feel scared. I sometimes feel hurt. And then they see other men not expressing those things. And so they say, oh man, like there's something wrong with me because I'm feeling these feelings. It doesn't look like other men are feeling these feelings.
Yeah.
You know, what's wrong with me that I'm having those experiences? And then so and so men, I think, get caught in that place of feeling like I'm a failure as a man because I'm having these feelings that I don't see any other man experiencing. And so it really keeps them feeling isolated and not able to turn to other people for support.
Yeah, no, it's well said. I mean, that's the hard thing in general. It's like we have, I believe, we see it on social media. We see it when we go to family gatherings, going to church, et cetera. Like there's a expected way we're supposed to present. So you don't often see men sitting down with each other, and not even sometimes women or individuals that are non-binary, like sitting down and saying like, I'm hurt, I'm sad, or posting on social media like I'm really depressed, I'm really feeling shameful today. It's like there's this expectation that things are presented sort of a final product, a polished product. And so then everybody, like you said, are at home and saying, I don't feel that way. And in media and stuff, when we look at media, you don't see men getting vulnerable. Like when you watch like an Avengers film, right? Like Black Widow, she's gonna cry, or Scarlet Witch is gonna cry because Vision was killed, but all the men just get angry and beat up. And so it's just in our general kind of culture to express that anger is that one emotion that's okay. But the problem is anger doesn't always relieve what's underneath. And so then people hold those repressed experiences. And like you said, it can turn into depression, aggression, aggravation, and suicidal attempts or completion. I wanted to pull you in, Neil. In the OCD community, some of the intrusive topics sometimes for men can be harder to open up and share about. So sometimes people will talk about their checking or their contamination, but it can be things like sexual orientation OCD and embarrassment around that, or there can be like violent intrusive, aggressive thoughts towards like women or vulnerable populations. And I know that's one of the reasons that you felt maybe having like a men's support group at the conference would be helpful, so people felt more comfortable opening up about those things. I know you run peer support groups. What are some of the things that you see even in the OCD community where there's a little bit of like shame or resistance to opening up to certain intrusive thoughts or certain compulsions?
Yeah, I think that no matter how tight-knit our community is, I think the general culture of the world always overtakes that, right? Because still I see like, pedophile OCD. Are we still calling it that? Is that something different now?
No.
That's okay. That's it. All right, good. Sexual orientation OCD. Violent and sexual intrusive thoughts, especially about hurting their children, right? That's like the worst one for men, is that men are supposed to be the protectors of their wife and children, right? What if I can't protect them? What if I actually hurt them? I've seen that be pervasive. And I think that once again, it's just going to take us continuing to have these conversations to break away that shame and stigma, because I personally, and I love that Alex, your introduction was way more impressive than mine.
I loved yours.
But
your introduction was brilliant. I love it.
Yeah. But I think talking about masculinity is really the biggest thing, right? And I think that talking about what masculinity means to you and deconstructing what masculinity has meant for the past millennia is important, right? Because I've never been in a fight in my life. I've never hurt someone. I've never, right? Like what is masculinity to you? And I think that's what I ask people often when they come to me with like, well, I'm a man, right? Like I can't be having these sexual thoughts about children and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, you're not acting on them. You have OCD, right? like that's first and foremost. Second, how does that affect you? How does that affect your masculinity? Right? And I think that's really, it's the cultural definition of masculinity that we've attached to ourselves, which is the most harmful thing. And OCD and other mental health disorders alike, that's what keeps people from seeking treatment, is this masculinity plague.
Absolutely. How, maybe to jump it back on this topic to both of you, Neil, I'll start with you, is how do we work on that? I mean, the good news is that we do know that there has been some trend. There's definitely more and more men getting help for mental health, whether it's medications, whether it's behavioral therapy, support groups, males dealing with substance use disorder. They're going to rehab in higher numbers, going to AA. So we know something's working, but what do you feel is still needing to be done around masculinity and the willingness to get support for substance use, for obsessive compulsive disorder, for hoarding, etc.?
I think if we destroyed the idea of what masculinity and femininity is altogether and just called each other humans, that would be good. That'll never happen. But in my ideal world, I mean, that's really what I mean. Like, I think that's how I personally deconstructed what I thought masculinity was just the fact that, like, I'm a human, and what are my values as a human, right? I want to leave out every other piece of what is my identity or what are my values within my family system, within my friend system, you know, within my religious system, within the cultural system. What are my values as a human being, right? And none of them included punching people when I'm sad, right? I was like, oh, I think, okay, so emotional vulnerability is one of mine. Honesty, integrity, you know, resourcefulness is another one. And yeah, I think that's how I built my masculinity from the ground up, was just what are my values as a human? And I think that really helped me.
Well said, Alex. How about the same question for you? Is like, what are some of the things that you feel that we can do just in general? You talk, you know, obviously with masculinity, preventing people from getting help, or what help looks like.
Yeah, and I'm glad that Neil brought up, you know, just we need to shift what masculinity looks like. One thing that I've noticed is that, you know, when working with elementary school students, there isn't any stigma almost against mental health. You know, I would work with kids and I'd be their therapist, and then they'd bring me around to their friends and say, like, hey, look, this is my therapist, this is my therapist. But then there's a fundamental shift once you get to like really have to adopt that mentality of, now I'm a man, you know, I'm entering manhood and I really need to establish myself in, you know, in terms of masculinity. That's where you see a huge shift. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, I can do this on my own. I'm a man. And then that's where like there's just a huge shift away from mental health seeking or help seeking in general. So I think we do need to have a huge conversation on, hey, what does masculinity look like? And I'm glad you brought up media, Chris, earlier. I think that that's a huge one as well. I think we're seeing a little bit of a shift there, but still a long ways to go. You know, we've come a long way from like the Clint Eastwood, John Wayne days, and now, you know, you watch shows like Ted Lasso is a great example, you know, of help seeking and, you know, men who are able to express vulnerabilities and stuff. And so I think that there's a lot of you know, different media sources that are at least having more positive views of masculinity. But I think that those two things on a big level will need to change, but it's not the type of thing that's going to happen overnight.
You know what? It's funny that you brought up media. Well, I brought it up, but I'm glad you readdressed it, because I saw one time it was like a spliced, somebody had put it together about men going to therapy in movies, and it's always, the therapist is always like a young, pretty attractive woman, and it's almost like it makes it like okay that this guy is going to therapy because he has a good-looking female therapist. And I just remember I never even thought of that, but this therapist that I follow on Instagram had spliced and just said, look, like, the only way we're telling men it's acceptable to go to therapy is if their you know, their therapist is basically, you know, attractive and vulnerable and desirable. It's almost like, oh, well, of course he's going to see her. Why wouldn't he? It's just like, what? Like, those are the kind of images that people are getting. And you know, somebody's going to regurgitate that and think like, okay, it's still not okay to go to therapy unless my therapist looks like that. So it's just stuff like that. I just think it's crazy. Yeah, Neil.
I didn't know how else to raise my hand or
no, I want us to, if somebody says something besides me you want to jump into, definitely jump in.
I had more to add on the fact of like, not only how do we continue to have this conversation, but how do we continue to move towards a more positive view of masculinity or what mental health means for men, right? Modeling behavior for other dudes has been the weirdest experience of my life, and also I think the most rewarding. Like, when I am sad, I text my friends and I'm like, hey, I'm sad, can we talk about it, right? Do you have space for me right now? I would love to like unload this on you. It's uncomfortable at first, right? And I think that that's an important thing for me to mention here, because it's not like you're going to start modeling the behavior and everybody's going to be like, oh my God, congratulations, right? Like, nobody's going to do that for you. You're going to model this behavior and they're going to be like, whoa, this is like way out of the norm, right? But the more you do it, the better it feels and the more accepted it is within your circles. I mean, now people expect texts from me being like, "Hey, I'm sad. Do you want to do you want to go do something about that?" And they're like, "Mm-hmm, yeah." And I would also say, just giving the space, right? And I feel like reaching out a hand and texting people and just regular mental health check-ins. How are you? Right. And how are you really? Right. This is a judgment-free, shame-free zone. How can I serve you? Right. How can I best help you out with what you need right now? Has also been transformative in my life. I've seen people open up that I never thought in a million years would open up. And speaking of Megan Brooks' question at 11:19 a.m.
I was going to bring that question up and then Mojo Matthews. But yeah, if we could bring that up, Jess, perfect.
So I did this for my grandpa and opened the door like 20 years ago to like, the dude is a very stoic guy. He's the most stoic of all of the men. It is almost like a caricature. And I opened the door like 20 years ago, and right now we're going through a really difficult time as a family. And the other day, for the first time in 25 years, he said, "I love you so much." And he also stated earlier in the week, he expressed his emotions for the first time in the 27 years that I've been alive. So that opening the door and just kind of, hey, this is like an open pasture. Right? This is an open pasture for you to like live free and roam around in and express your emotions in, has been really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, do you have any thoughts, Alex, also? And before I move on to you, Alex, I mean, Neil, that's great. And I think what's so powerful about you modeling behaviors like that even is impacting your own grandfather, who's had decades and generational pressures to act and behave a certain way. And, one thing I see sometimes that really bothers me is sometimes people will say like, people do like little TikToks or Instagram reels where it's like, I wish we could go back to the old days of how men were masculine. And it'll show like Harry Styles currently, wearing a dress and having nail polish, and it'll be like, like a thumbs down, but then they'll show a picture of a military guy from the 50s. And I just remember, my grandma telling me like, your grandfather was like an emotional guy and got a lot of, but he was in the military, but got a lot of negative feedback for that because he was military, like fought in the World War II, was supposed to act a certain way. And people used to, make fun of him just for, and it's funny because to me, my grandfather wasn't very feminine in any way, but just there's these expectations. So thank you for bringing that up. Alex, any thoughts about Megan's question about what we can do? Like, let's say, obviously, there's always going to be a lot of work on the younger generation to try to change that. But there are still so many older men that grew up in a different time. Like, how do we get them to open up, to express themselves, and to recognize that some of those repressed emotions are not being helpful at all to be repressed?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, Megan. I think that I would just piggyback on what Neil said. I think he summed it up perfect. Modeling is so critical, especially in utilizing the relationship, right? Like, Neil's example is there's love there, and that there's already that connection. And so Neil, like, there's already the respect, right? And so if Neil's modeling like, hey, this is okay to express emotions. Like this is going to help us to feel connected, and this is how it should be. And then, it's maybe a slower process because they've had, 50, 60 years of having seen the world in a specific way. So it might be a slower process, but again, when they see that modeled for them, and then they'll see the effects too. They'll see the positive effects of having those closer connections and being able to express their emotions. So that's critical. So yeah, I mean, to go back to our question, yeah, I think that it is, including elderly men. It's a slower process, but again, just the conversation about it, the modeling, all those things are going to have a huge impact, and of course, impact elderly men as well. But again, I would just piggyback on what Neil said. You said it perfect.
Yeah. When I oh, go on, Neil.
No, that is so flattering, Alex. Thank you. I thought I like mumbled through that, so I really appreciate that.
That was great.
Well, I know in undergrad, I mean, obviously I work with OCD, anxiety, depression. I mean, that's my focus. But in undergrad, in practicum, we had practicum, and I had to work in different kind of mental health settings. And I worked with, because I'm sober, I worked with AA because I went to Cal State Long Beach, and there's the vet hospital right there, and I helped run some of the men's AA groups. And, you know, speaking of modeling, I remember because it was mostly elderly men in that group. And, you know, a lot of times, like when men would go to cry, they would just shut down. And it was really powerful to see like a couple of the men that were more comfortable say, come on, you can cry it out, like open up and talk. So what I think it's really going to take, Megan, is like elderly men to jump into this space and to really work on and say like, look, let's talk about it. And, you know, I know like with my clients that are elderly men with OCD, because it's mainly what I work with, I know for me, a lot of times it's their wives having to get them to come to therapy because they're very like, this is just who I am. I'm finicky and I like these little behaviors and things like that. And they're so embarrassed. They're like, you know, because we do intensives and people fly in for them and they're like, why to lie to my friends and tell them I'm here? And I always try to normalize it. And it's like, what if you went back and told your friends? You know, you're 70, you're 80, like go back and tell your friends there's nothing left to lose, like just to say that. And I guarantee, you know, some of the men that you live with, you know, are widowed and have lost their wives, or, you know, he lived in a retirement community. So there's people that don't see their families that often, but he was so embarrassed about getting OCD treatment because of the thoughts of like, I had to lie to say where I was going to be here and my wife's making me come here. And I found that for me as a clinician, that was some of the work I don't normally do with clients in the beginning, was definitely addressing like this idea of like somehow getting mental health treatment is embarrassing and we have to hide it. Like, you know, I even see my clients that are 12 or 13 being open, like, hey guys, I'm going to a treatment program, be back in 3 weeks in school, but there's still that. So I just think the more that we can normalize that mental health treatment will be helpful. I want to get to the next question at 12:26 your time. Majo Matthew says, I have a question to all of you. In OCD, can there be mood swings? To be more specific, sudden irritability and anger for seemingly unknown reasons. So I'll start with you, Neil. Like in OCD, is that something that either you experience or you see a lot of other people experience?
Yes. Double yes. Yeah, I think there's a lot of, we should do a thing about like OCD and weird quirks that not everyone knows about. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's the underlying anxiety bubbling up. Like sometimes, right, I'm just so anxious and I don't even recognize that I'm anxious. And then all of a sudden I'm like really pissed and I'll be like talking to my mom and, you know, she'll say something like, someone's having a bad day. And I'll be like, what? No, I'm not. And she's like, Neil, you're acting like totally rude towards me. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess you know what? I guess I am anxious. Right. And it's taking a step back for me and being like, someone calling me out on my BS really helps me think about like, oh, yeah, where is my state today? Right. Am I anxious? Did something happen that triggered me earlier that I ignored? Yeah, mood swings and sudden irritability and anger for seemingly unknown reasons, for sure. For me, a lot of time it is the underlying anxiety. And sometimes I'm just a human. And sometimes I'm just angry and suddenly irritable for no reason because I'm sassy. You know?
Well, I think too, Majo Matthew, I think what's difficult with OCD is the intrusive warning like signals that your brain is getting. So the limbic system, the amygdala, it's going off, it's telling you something's wrong. So let's say an individual has OCD harm around children. And so they're at Target and they're around children and they're getting these intrusive thoughts and these feelings. It's telling you you're in danger. But the difference with OCD than let's say somebody who's really in danger, if I'm driving down the street and a car almost hits me, I can swerve, I can take control, do something about it to feel safe. And then my body calms down and moves on. But when we have these intrusive thoughts about a situation that isn't even real, then you have nothing you can do about it. So then people just stew on it and ruminate and feel loss of control and frustration. And so I think of, you know, one of, at the conferences once they explained OCD and anger and mood swings. And they said, look, if you have the person who has a bucket, in the average person's bucket, let's say it's 10 ounces, it's filled 2 ounces, you know, certain things happen throughout the day, but the bucket never overfills. But with OCD, especially if it's aggressive that day, it can almost fill up to the top. And so then any other thing that happens to you that day, it's overflowing. And so because your brain thinks you're in danger, you don't have the energy or the time to sit there and like calm down and deep breathe and be friendly. If somebody is pissing you off, they're pissing you off. And so there's a lot of anger and mood swings and frustration with OCD, constant being on edge and anxiety. And so with OCD, we noticed with some of my research for my thesis, we found this higher levels of emotional deregulation. So intense anxiety and anger and frustration, intense sadness and shutting down. And so part of what can help with this is making sure that you are actively doing, offensive exposures. Like you wake up each day with a game plan, because part of OCD treatment is feeling like you get your sense of control back, which you feel like you don't have when you're getting all these intrusive thoughts. And what we know, like Alex was saying, underneath anger, there's a lot of feelings of like unjust or like a lack of control. So by waking up with a game plan and having exposure, so going back to my harm with kids example, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to go into the kids section where there's kids. I'm going to drive by a school where kids are getting down out of class. I'm going to volunteer to babysit my nephew. You're kind of taking charge of your treatment and fighting back. And then don't forget about self-care measures, making sure that you're getting sleep and you're doing exercise and things like that to help your general anxiety level to go down. So it's absolutely part of it. It was me. I was angry all the time and irritable and frustrated, and people didn't like to be around me. But I can say that as I got better on the treatment, absolutely this was dealt with. I will say sometimes medication can help as well. I think medication also helped with this and took the edge off a little bit. But definitely the behavioral therapy and getting better was like a huge component to this. Alex, about depression, because that's the other thing that can sometimes add to irritability and anger. I mean, OCD, we definitely see that in anxiety, like, Neil addressed, but in depression, like we see in men, that depression can be like an irritability and stuff like that. Why do you feel that maybe like in depression, we see that as well, that mood swings and that irritability?
Yeah, absolutely. And it does go back to kind of what we discussed of, well, for men in particular, it is the more acceptable way to express that, right? And also with depression, I think there's also this connotation that if you're depressed, you're sad, right? And that's what we've kind of come to understand as depression. But it isn't that, right? It's just that there's a numbness. And then and there's a lack of motivation, there's the numbness, and then the lack of hope. But then it's like on a daily basis, you're asked to do so many things. You're asked to, have a sense of hope, and you have to still continue your day-to-day life with, again, a feeling of not having hope, a feeling of numbness. And so life becomes really, really overwhelming, really, really fast. I liked your bucket example. It's similar with depression, right? If your bucket is full, just trying to live and just trying to stay alive, and all your mental energy is going to that, you don't have a whole lot of mental energy to give to day-to-day sort of activities or day-to-day, maybe bothersome things that might come up. And so I think it's pretty much the same when you discuss depression.
When you talk with a client, what are some of those general self-care measures that you talk to them about to make sure that, with OCD, obviously it's a little bit different because we don't want to ever do things as like a reaction kind of, like if somebody's having intrusive thoughts, for instance, about harming a child, we don't want them to quickly like run and go do like deep breathing, because it sort of invalidates the fact that this is an intrusive thought versus real danger. But in general, anybody going through a mental health condition, what are some of the things that you talk to clients about when it comes to that self-care to make sure that they aren't constantly on edge and stressed out and struggling with stress?
Right. A great question. It's different for everybody. That's another thing is, we hear about all these different like coping tools, but really for one person, it might be one thing. Another person might be a whole nother thing. But I like the idea of really giving yourself permission to do it. Right. That's the huge part, is like a lot of times there's so much guilt, like, oh, I'm taking time for myself, I should be doing X, Y, Z. And then whatever you do, it's not going to be relaxing. You're not going to be able to get into it and be present with it. So for everyone, it might look completely different. For one person, reading might do it, right? They could just lose themselves into it. It's really anything that you lose yourself in is huge. Right. And then if there's more severe things, then we go to things like deep breathing techniques, grounding techniques are really, really important. And then I emphasize exercise. There's so much research to show that exercise has a huge impact on depression and the brain's functioning. It's huge for mental health in general. But again, it's just really, I like to work with the client and find out, hey, what does it for you? Because one client video games might be their thing. They just lose themselves in video games, and just so much peace that goes along with it. And they come out of it grounded and reset. And that's huge. And other people, it might be meditation. Other people, it might be reading. And so really just finding like, hey, what does that for you? What helps you to lose yourself? What helps you to get present and just feel like you've decompressed?
Well said. I'm going to get to Nikki and then Ashwin. So Nikki's comment, I want to start with that at 12:42. So Nikki says, in my OCD support group, there are mostly men who attend, and you can tell they feel so relieved after they've talked. It's so refreshing to see anyone, especially men, walk away with a weight lifted off of their shoulder. I know for you, Neil, you run support groups for OCD peers. What has that been like, working with men? And do you see that they have the same experience that Nikki talks about in her support group?
Absolutely. I mean, even if everyone is in the same support group, right? And if we have a mix of men and women, it is very obvious by the end that the men are seemingly significantly and like profoundly more affected by whatever we talked about that day. And I think that could be a lot of factors, right? That could be individual. Maybe those certain men don't have people to talk to but as a trend as a whole, oh yeah, men are like way more profoundly affected and visibly are lighter. They're sitting up straighter. They are talking more enthusiastically by the end of it. And I think it's just really important, especially with OCD, that, there's shame in talking about your emotions regardless, right? For men, as we've been discussing, but that's double or triple or quadruple the shame with the OCD thoughts. And so to be able to give people that space is just so important. And every year at the conference for the
oh my God, sorry. How do I stop it? Oh my God.
Every year at the conference for the past 7 years, we've run that.
It was one of those Amber alerts on my phone.
Oh, I
sorry. I was like, what was that?
but for the
I'm
past,
so sorry. Go on.
For the past 7 years at the conference, the men's support group has not only grown every single year, but every single year me and Jacques at least get 1 or 2 people afterwards who come up to us and are just like, this was life-changing, and this group, really needs to stay where it is, because it's just important to have a space where I think it's practicing, right? And I think a men's exclusive group, especially at the conference, is them practicing that skill of being able to release it. But yeah, huge.
Yeah, what I wanted to add is, so, throwing body dysmorphic disorder in the mix, I struggle with body dysmorphic disorder. I mean, it's in not remission, but recovery now. But when I did struggle with it, was in a support group. I remember for us, I mean, that was big. I didn't have as much shame of going to treatment for the OCD. I did have a lot of shame actually opening up about it. And a lot of people did tell me early on, like, that's something you should just get over or stop. I don't know if that was necessarily because I was a man, or more so to do with just how people deal with mental health altogether. But I know we used to have this talk all the time in our BDD support group of just, it's not normal for men to be vain and to care about their appearance and to talk about things when it comes to image. And so all of us constantly would say, like, this support group is the only place we are able to talk about this issue, because we can't talk to our wives or our girlfriends or our parents or our sisters or our, brothers or our friends, because it's just not expected or accepted to be talking about image all the time. And, we know that about 10% of all cases of eating disorders are men. And there's a high trend in a subtype of BDD known as muscle dysmorphia, because now on Instagram and on TikTok and stuff, people are sharing like their weight loss stuff and their weight training and their weight gain. And so that's even another mental health space when we talk about eating disorders and BDD. But I remember talking about BDD, I just felt like this is weird to talk about image and stuff. So I do believe that for you, like Nikki is saying, is that this is one of those things where it does become such an outlet. It may be the only place somebody can go once a week or once a month where they're able to actually get support and advice, because they might not be opening up to the people in their lives.
True.
Alex, how about for you, whether it's a support group, or even if it's not a support group, but just like supportive family, or even just coming to therapy, like what are some of the things that men say to you when they've gone through, getting mental health support, and have they had similar experiences to what Nikki mentioned?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Men are so desperate to be able to get something off their chest, right? To be able to talk about these things. Again, they really, really want to. It's just so terrifying for them. And so to have that space where they can do it, it's such a relief. But again, so it takes a huge amount of safety. And so, in therapy, just creating that sense of safety, it can be challenging, right? And it can take a lot of time. But once they finally have that and feel that safety, like, okay, it's okay, I won't be criticized, I'm accepted for who I am, then yeah, that feeling is, it's potentially the only time that they've ever had it, right? And the group, going back to what Nikki said, that's probably the only time that those men have ever had an opportunity to share their true feelings and these vulnerabilities. And that's huge, right? That's something they've had to live with for many, many years. And so to have that experience is such a relief. And again, it's the same thing in individual therapy as well. Is oftentimes I pretty much, I would say about every client I've had, or near every client, has said, you're the only person I've told about this, right? You're the only person I can talk to about this particular issue. And it's I don't want to say flattering, but it's rewarding to hear that I've created that sense of safety. It's also devastating to know, like, they haven't been able to talk about that with anyone else, and something they've carried with them on a day-to-day basis. It just, I think, speaks to that level of safety that's needed for them to be able to share this, and again, the amount of fear and shame that's associated with them sharing that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we got to keep doing it. We got to keep encouraging, part of men's mental health, just keep encouraging people to go to support groups, go to therapy, go get treatment. And if you're not comfortable, at least starting with like watching something like this, or and there's a lot of OCD workbooks and things like that people can do. If we could throw on Ashwin's question at 12:41, how do you manage the morning anxiety, which leads to racing heart and chest tightness when we plan to do an exposure? So my guess is that it's like somebody is waking up, there's anxiety in the morning because they are about to do an exposure. So for you, Neil, like, how do you work with clients, or for your own OCD treatment? Like, how do you deal with, you wake up and let's say you're going to go somewhere or do something that's an OCD related exposure? Like, how do you deal with that anticipatory anxiety that comes up right before doing it?
Man, I haven't done a major exposure in forever and a day. Thank you, inpatient treatment. But I would say, generally, just whenever I have anticipatory anxiety like that, or just the regular, right? I hear a lot of people wake up in the morning just extremely anxious, right? You just start your day off anxious because you had terrible dreams, or your OCD bled into your dreams, right? Or you had a terrible day yesterday, whatever it is, right? I used to have terrible anxiety in the morning until I designed a morning routine. I think a morning routine is absolutely crucial for me. Getting up, spending quiet time, not looking at my phone, immediately drinking water, having a good breakfast, reading, all of those things are like crucial to my morning routine. And I think that as long as it is not an activity that is providing some sort of reassurance, you are allowed to have peace before you do an exposure, right? I would also say, if it is something that you cannot figure out and the anxiety is coming from absolutely nowhere, right? Sit with it, right? So I was so anxious the other day, and I messaged my friend, and and I was like, "Oh, I can't handle this, blah blah blah," and they said, "Bathe in it," and I was like, "Oh, you're right." And I don't know why, but it was such a powerful imagery for me that I was like, "You're right. I am the king of chaos. I will bathe in this anxiety." And I like sat outside and got fresh air and watered myself and gave myself sunlight, because I'm a houseplant with more complicated emotions. And I bathed in the anxiety. It gave me such peace to not be resisting it. I still felt horrible. The anxiety was still there. But when you allow yourself to just sit with it, it dissipates, right? Anxiety is not forever. So for sure, morning routine. Second, yeah, if you can't do it, if you can't do a morning routine, if you can't have activities with yourself in the morning when you're that anxious, sit with it for as long as you can.
Yeah. I want to add too, the way that I like, so Ashwin, like, congratulations on being brave and like waking up and knowing like, okay, I'm about to do some exposures, right? And you are going to get anxiety, because basically what OCD has told you is that these things that it's having you do, these compulsions, are the reason that you're alive, well, and healthy, and in a good space. And so by you doing exposures, it's deregulating you, and it's basically your brain thinks you're about to do something unsafe. what I always tell people is anticipatory anxiety and OCD is a lot like a movie trailer. So when we go and see a movie trailer, it's like action packed. It's amazing. It's like 3 minutes of pure, like incredible, like just intensity that we're like, oh my God, I got to see this when it comes out. I'm going to, call out sick. I'm going to show up on a wait in line the night before. And then inevitably you see the movie and you're just like, wow, this is so bland. This did not live up to my expectations. I rarely have seen a trailer that was worse than a movie. Like every movie never lives up to the trailer's expectations. And that's really that anticipatory anxiety you're experiencing, Ashwin, is you're about to do an exposure. Your brain is going to all the what ifs. All these different things can go wrong. These bad things are going to happen. It's going to be miserable. Oh my God. But if you can start to learn that that's the movie trailer, it's trying to put all these like intense emotions at you, but the actual exposure is going to be pretty bland. Sure, it's going to create that anxiety at first, but as you push through it and learn that distress tolerance and really gain that strength and recognize like, look, I got this, you'll notice that it didn't turn out nearly as bad as you thought. And it never does, because OCD has this component of this overestimation of danger. So as you continue to do that same exposure day after day after day, you will learn from it. Your brain actually learns and says, you know what? I don't think it's going to be as scary as the anticipatory anxiety tells me. In fact, this anticipatory anxiety is kind of lying to me. I'm not even going to really kind of like push. I'm going to push through it versus like worry about it. And that's how you can handle it. So definitely physically attack it is going to make you not as worried about that anticipatory anxiety.
One quick thing, I heard a comedian actually that I really love this, and I pass it on, is say, when you get that feeling, it means that you're going to have a memory, right? It means that you're going to have an experience, and just reframing it in that of like, hey, racing heart, chest tightness, that means I'm about to have a really, really important experience in my life. And looking at it like that and being excited for it, as opposed to, fearing it and maybe being reluctant.
Yeah, and I always tell people to tie in their values. Like by you feeling those emotions, it means you're about to do something big. You're about to stretch out your safety and your safety zone, your comfort zone. And so the only way we ever go to get to growth is we go through discomfort. And so if you can remember that temporary discomfort is leading you, like Alex was saying, to like a much bigger positive experience, that is going to make it worth it. Before I let you guys kind of give like your final thoughts, I want to read a couple nice comments. So Jess at 1248 DJ IBG says, good point about beautiful therapists. I just thought about DiCaprio's character in The Departed. There was a movie, I can't remember, that I just saw where the main character goes to therapy and the therapist is, yeah. So it's definitely an issue in movies. Megan says, Neil, you're a gem. I've seen you in some other online forums. Thank you for representing mental health. You're doing great. So good job. Nikki says, it's amazing to hear what they have to say in group. They feel safe amongst themselves when they do their own. So thank you, everybody, for your comments. To kind of wrap it up, I want to give each person sort of a final thought. Alex, I'll start with you. Like, what are some final thoughts? Either, what would be some words of encouragement for either loved ones or an individual who's a male that's kind of hesitant to OCD or general therapy, or what are some things you hope to see in next, men's and mental health, or just what are some final thoughts to leave everybody with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, obviously being here is a great step. So, thank you for being here and even wanting to be a part of this conversation, a really important one that needs to happen. So that's huge. Also, I think, just a couple of takeaways is like, be patient with men. It's terrifying. And there's a really, really good reason why they're afraid to share their emotions. And so I think recognizing that, and then, that you can model, right? And that modeling piece is so huge, is modeling, what healthy communication of feelings is and providing them with that sense of safety. But I think, and again, validating their experience of shame and their experience of, struggle to be able to be open and share their feelings. It's really, really difficult. And so, but yeah, again, I think that as a whole, we need to have a conversation about how to shift, masculinity, what it looks like to include being able to come to others for support. But yeah, like I said, and then for those who are here and watching this, you're already kind of doing that by getting educated and wanting to be part of the process. So yeah.
Really well said. And how about for you, Neil? What are some final thoughts on this topic?
Who designed masculinity like 8,000 years ago and was like, number one rule, you can't ever ask for help? I've never.
Let's find them. Let's get them.
Yeah, who did this? I want to go kick someone in the shins like 8,000 years ago. No, I think I just need to parrot everything Alex said. But one thing I want to make yeah, exceptionally clear is the safety piece. And Alex is right. I think that is the most important thing. So I work as a certified trauma counselor. So I work specifically with complex and really just kind of ingrained trauma within the family system. And one of my clients was a male. They had not told anyone for 20 years what they had been going through, right? 20 years. It was the first time that they had cried like 5 years in my office. And all I asked was, it's so odd that you're talking about all these horrendous things that you've been through, but you've never once shed a tear or showed any emotion. Why is that? And they all just, I mean, for an entire hour and a half, we just cried together, right? And sometimes it really is that simple. Just be like, this is a space where you can show your emotions. It is safe here. I am not going to judge you. You should be having these emotions. Crying is healthy and wonderful and feels great. I cry all the time. It's one of my favorite activities. So I think the safety piece is the one that I think we just fail men all the time with in society, right? And just as simple as, hey, seems really hard. Why are we not showing emotions, right? And this person, oh my gosh, because I'm not allowed to cry anywhere else, right? I'm not allowed was what was the phrasing they used. So allow people, give people the permission, like Alex said, is huge. Yeah. Cry lots, eat chocolate, love yourself, go on walks, drink water. I love you.
Love it. Thank you both. I mean, what my final thought just is like, I think back to my own care. Like I would not be where I was today. I mean, in my teens and my 20s, my early 20s, it was just hell. And so if I did not go to therapy, if I did not find treatment, if I wasn't willing to open up about my image concerns, I would have never gotten the care that I had for BDD. So I just always want to tell people, regardless of if you're non-binary, if you're a woman, or if you're a man, like please go get help. And I know that there's a lot of different unique challenges for all different groups. But since this is specifically for men, just there is going to be stigma. You're going to maybe experience some shame and some guilt. But at the end of the day, I know I can speak on behalf of Neil and myself for getting treatment for OCD and other mental health conditions, substance use and things like that. It's so important to get that help and to push through that stigma. I want to thank my guests so much for being here. If you have any questions for my guests, if you specifically want to, if there's something that Alex said, Alex is in private practice in Orange County, so you can look him up by his name. But also, if you have any questions for him or for Neil, both of them are incredible counselors as well as humans. Definitely email the International OCD Foundation at info@iocdf.org. We'll make sure they're really good at getting your emails to them specifically, or to me, or to the foundation in general. Quick announcements before we go. Don't forget to join the Peace of Mind virtual community at iocdf.org/peace of mind. There you can view the live stream schedule and submit topics and questions for future events. We definitely want to hear what questions you have and what future events you want to see, and definitely look up what the topics are coming up. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we are super appreciative of all of you. Thank you to everybody that came on today and really made sure to join the conversation and to ask your questions and to submit your comments and to share. These are not going to disappear. This stays up on all of the IOCDF social media across platforms. I love YouTube and Facebook, obviously, for me, are the easiest to get to. So make sure to share this. If there's somebody in your life that you absolutely think would benefit for this information, you can share them this link and have them watch it. Lastly, I want to thank Alex and Neil. This was a perfect conversation. Couldn't have done it without you two. And to everybody watching, make sure you have an amazing rest of your day. Fight your battles. You're stronger than you know. And I thank everyone, and make sure to stick here at the IOCDF. We have a community for you. Thank you.